Hi everyone. This is Inventorying Student Access and Environment. Thank you for showing up and for taking the time to grow yourself. This is the 5th session in our first distance learning PD module, Preparing Your Remote Classroom. If you are curious how all of the content works or how it fits together and builds on each other, feel free to pause here and read the distance learning course introduction document. Otherwise, let's jump in. This slide represents our priorities across all of the Department of Education. These professional development sessions are in alignment with our educators' priority. We hope you feel supported by using this resource. Our objectives for this session are that we will define all students will learn, and that we will plan a process for identifying vulnerable students, identifying access to materials, and understanding students' environments. And here is our agenda for this time together. Take a second and look it over now. We always want to ensure our professional development resources are supporting teacher growth and development, and that we use the team rubric as the anchor for that. This particular session is aligned to both the expectations and teacher knowledge of students indicators on the team rubric. And those indicators are broken down into the following descriptors. Take a minute and read these descriptors so you know what we're driving towards. All right, let's do a personal reflection on this phrase, all students will learn. Take a minute and make a list. What does this phrase mean to you? Write down as many ideas as you can. Feel free to pause here to take the time you need. When I see this phrase, I think about the students that often have more challenges, and that our goal has to be to ensure all students learn. And that all really means all, regardless of the student's current level of access to resources or whether or not they fall into a category of being a vulnerable student. Our job is not just to teach, it is to ensure all students learn. Okay, let's take another minute to reflect on this a little bit deeper. Think or write, when is a time as a teacher when you did this really well? And when is a time as a teacher when this was really hard to do? Feel free to pause here and take the time you need. The reality is that for most of us, last spring was a time when this was really hard to do. And if you are getting ready to teach in a remote classroom to start this school year, you may have students for whom this will be really hard. And even though we know that, even though it is going to be hard, we still have to make it happen. We have a commitment to every single one of our students, an obligation that they all learn. And so that's the work that we're going to dig into. How can we ensure that that happens? So how do we do this? The first step, which we're tackling in this session, is to make a plan to get all of the information we need to know the scope of what the challenges actually are. To make this plan, the first thing we're going to do is identify needs and access and understand students' environment. So we have to first identify vulnerable students. Next, identify what resources students have access to. And last, we have to understand the environment that students will be working in. So we're going to take each of these steps one at a time. The first being identify our vulnerable students. What do we mean by vulnerable? Vulnerable students are those who are most likely to be negatively impacted by school closures. This definition comes directly from the Department of Education's Access and Opportunity Toolkit. If you're curious about reading more, you can pause here and scroll down because that toolkit is loaded as a resource. Students who are vulnerable are typically experiencing one of the challenges listed here. Take a minute and read through this list. The next step is identifying what resources students have access to. This includes things like technology, phones, internet, pens, pencils, books, paper, printer. I'm sure you could add a number of things to this list. Anything that might be helpful for student learning at home. It's important that we know what kids already have access to so we can plan to get them access to anything else they don't have but will need. And the last step is understanding environment. Fully understanding the environment students will be working in will help to give you a full picture that you can use to meet students' needs. That understanding can include things like, where is the physical space that they will be working? What other family members are around that may play a role in their environment? What is their typical wake-up time or their typical bedtime? Now it's time for you to jump in and go through your own process for each of those 3 steps. In just a couple minutes, you're going to press pause and get to work on that. But first, let me explain some resources. For this process, you are going to need to download first Resource 1, the Inventorying Student Access and Environment handout. This handout is a guided worksheet that will take you through all the steps in the process. You can use the questions to know what other resource you should be looking at and what kind of thinking to do to move forward with your plan. You'll also need to download resources 2 through 5 and gather your school or district information, things like student lists, student information, technology access, survey data, any information you can get about the students who are assigned to you right now would be helpful. Once you have all of that, press pause, keep the video on pause so that you can take all the time you need to really do this work. Okay, I hope you've made some significant progress on that plan. This is a real time-intensive project, but it is one that is crucial. Knowing this information will allow you to take steps to work with your school and district teams to be able to provide access and opportunity for every single one of your students. Right now, we're going to take 2 minutes and stamp any important next steps for yourself. Based on where you got in the process, what 3 next steps do you need to commit to taking to ensure you go into the school year with a strong understanding of who your most vulnerable students are, what access your students have, and what environments they'll be working in? Press pause and reflect on that now. As we close out this session, let's revisit what we accomplished during this time. First, we defined all students will learn. Then we spent a lot of time planning your own process for each of those steps: identifying vulnerable students, identifying access to materials, and understanding students' working environments. Thank you so much for giving yourself the time and space and patience to dig in and make a really strong plan to gather this information and have these phone calls with families. I know that it will pay off for your students as you launch your remote classroom.